Welcome to Once Upon a Dream, your haven for soothing bedtime stories that bring calm and magic to your nights. Good evening. My name is Ben, and I'll be your guide tonight as we journey together into deep relaxation and restful sleep. Now, take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And as you exhale, feel the tension in your body begin to melt away. Allow your eyes to gently close and bring your attention to the soothing rhythm of your breath. With each inhale, invite calm and stillness into your body. With each exhale, let go of any worries or thoughts from the day. Relaxing every muscle, every joint, and every cell. You are safe. You are calm. And you are ready to drift into a deep and restful sleep. Now, I will tell you a story about Sophie and James. Close your eyes and allow their story to guide you further into relaxation. The first drops fell just as Sophie closed her sketchbook. She had spent the afternoon in the city botanical gardens, trying to capture the delicate unfurling of new fern fronds, but her mind had wandered with the gathering clouds. The air had that peculiar stillness that often preceded a storm, heavy with promise, like a held breath. She didn't mind the rain, truly. There was something soothing about the way it transformed the city, softening harsh edges and creating a gentle percussion on leaves and window panes. But her watercolors wouldn't survive the journey home in this weather. And her messenger bag, though beloved, had long since lost its waterproof qualities. The nearest shelter was a bookstore she had passed earlier, Weatherby's Books and Brew, its gilt lettering barely visible now through the thickening rain. Sophie hurried toward the warm glow of its windows, her shoes making soft, splashing sounds against the cobblestones. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, and the scent of books and coffee enveloped her like a warm embrace. Old hardcovers lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines creating a tapestry of faded reds, blues, and golds. A few scattered reading lamps cast pools of amber light, and somewhere, perhaps from an old record player, Billie Holiday's voice drifted through the air. "Quite the storm brewing," murmured the elderly shopkeeper, appearing from between the shelves like a gentle ghost. "You're welcome to wait it out. We have tea if you'd like." Sophie nodded gratefully, watching rivulets of rain trace patterns on the windows. As she made her way toward an empty table near the window, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. A collective soft gasp rose from the few other customers. In the sudden darkness, the rain seemed louder, more intimate somehow. The shopkeeper's calm voice cut through the darkness. "Not to worry, dears. I've got some candles right here." As warm light began to bloom around the store, Sophie noticed a man at the next table. He sat perfectly still, head slightly tilted, eyes closed. She might have thought him asleep, but there was something deliberate in his posture. He was listening. To the rain, perhaps, or to the way sounds changed in the darkness. He must have felt her gaze, because his eyes opened slowly, meeting hers. Behind rain-speckled glasses, they were kind eyes, the color of Earl Grey tea. He smiled, just slightly, and Sophie found herself smiling back. "It sounds different in here," he said softly, his voice matching the gentle atmosphere. The rain, the old windows and wooden floors create a unique acoustic environment. Sophie found herself leaning forward slightly, intrigued. "I was just thinking it sounded like music," she whispered back, not wanting to break the spell of quietness. "It does," he agreed, and then added, "I'm James." "Sophie," she replied, watching the candlelight flicker across his face. The shopkeeper appeared again, placing cups of steaming tea before them both. "On the house," she said with a knowing smile, "while we wait for the power to return." Outside, the rain continued its gentle symphony, and in that moment, neither Sophie nor James seemed to mind how long that wait might be. The power remained out, but neither Sophie nor James seemed to notice the passing of time. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, creating a gentle backdrop to their quiet conversation. "I record rain sounds," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Different surfaces, different intensities. Each rain has its own voice." He paused, listening to the droplets against the skylight. "This one, it's almost melodic." Sophie cradled her teacup, absorbing its warmth. "I've never thought about rain having different voices," she said softly. "But I paint how it looks, the way it blurs the edges of things, how it changes colors." She glanced at her sketchbook, resting safely beside her. The shopkeeper moved quietly between the candlelit tables, refreshing cups of tea. Other customers had settled into the atmosphere, some reading by candlelight, others simply watching the rain. The store had become a sanctuary of sorts, a pause in time. "May I?" James gestured to Sophie's sketchbook. She hesitated for just a moment before sliding it across the table. His hands were gentle as he opened it, careful not to disturb the pages where watercolors might still be drying. "These are the ferns from the botanical gardens," she explained, watching his face in the flickering light. "I was trying to capture how they unfurl, but then the clouds came and brought you here instead," he completed her thought, looking up with a slight smile. A soft roll of thunder sounded in the distance, more soothing than startling. The rain strengthened briefly, then settled back into its steady pattern. Sophie found herself drawing in her sketchbook again. Not the ferns this time, but the way the raindrops made patterns on the window, how they caught and held the candlelight. James watched her work, occasionally closing his eyes to listen to the rain. They existed together in comfortable silence, broken only by the soft scratch of Sophie's pencil and the continuous symphony of the rainfall. "I should record this," he said eventually, his voice matching the hushed atmosphere. The rain on these old windows, the way sound moves through this space. Would you mind? Sophie shook her head, smiling as he carefully pulled out his recording equipment. They sat in perfect stillness, capturing the gentle chaos of rain and the quiet breathing of the bookstore. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, but inside Weatherby's, time continued its gentle pause, measured only by the slow burning of candles and the steady drumming of rain. The following week brought more rain to the city, and with it, a sense of anticipation that Sophie couldn't quite explain. She found herself at Weatherby's again, this time by choice rather than necessity. The bell chimed softly as she entered, and she noticed James was already there, at what she had begun to think of as their table. "I brought something to share," he said by way of greeting, his voice matching the hushed atmosphere of the store. He had a small device on the table and a pair of headphones. "If you'd like to hear what rain sounds like in different places." Sophie settled into the chair across from him, accepting the headphones. The first recording was rain falling on ocean waves, a gentle rhythm that made her close her eyes. The second was rain in a forest, droplets catching on leaves before reaching the ground. Each recording told its own story. "This one," James said softly, is from the botanical gardens. The glass roof of the conservatory. He paused, noticing Sophie's smile. What is it? I was there too, she whispered, opening her sketchbook. Last Thursday, when it rained, I was painting the way the drops looked on the glass ceiling. They stared at each other for a moment, amused by the near miss of their paths crossing. The shopkeeper appeared then, as if by magic, with 2 cups of tea. Today it was chamomile with honey, its gentle scent mixing with the petrichor drifting in from outside. The rain changes how everything looks, Sophie explained, showing him her sketches. See how the colors blur and blend, how everything becomes softer. James leaned in to study her work, his tea forgotten for a moment. It changes how everything sounds, too, he murmured. The world gets quieter, more intimate, like it's sharing a secret. They spent the afternoon sharing their perspectives, Sophie's visual world blending with James's auditory one. She showed him how to see the patterns rain made, while he taught her to distinguish between the different pitches of droplets on various surfaces. As evening approached, the rain eased into a gentle mist. Other customers had come and gone, but Sophie and James remained, lost in their shared discovery of how differently they experienced the same moments. I should go, Sophie said eventually, though she made no move to leave. It's almost closing time. James nodded, but then hesitated. Tomorrow, he began, then glanced out the window. The forecast doesn't mention rain, but the gardens are still beautiful in sunlight. If you'd like to. Yes, Sophie replied before he could finish. I'd like to see how it looks without the rain. How it sounds. They walked to the door together, where the shopkeeper was pretending to arrange books while hiding a smile. Outside, the city glistened under streetlights, every surface washing the world in gentle reflections. Until tomorrow, then, James said softly. Sophie nodded, clutching her sketchbook. As they parted ways, the last drops of rain fell like musical notes, a gentle ending to their rain-soaked afternoon. Summer arrived with unexpected warmth, bringing weeks without rain. The city streets shimmered with heat, and the usual gray skies burned a relentless blue. Yet, Sophie and James continued to meet at Weatherby's, their table by the window now bathed in sunlight rather than raindrops. I'm designing a meditation space, James said one afternoon, spreading his blueprints across their table. But something's missing. He ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture Sophie had come to recognize as frustration. Show me, she said softly, moving her chair closer to his. The blueprints showed a circular room with high windows, and as James explained his vision, Sophie began to sketch in the margins of his drawings. "What if," she suggested, her pencil moving in gentle curves, "the light could flow like water, like rain but made of sunshine?" Her sketches showed hanging crystals, placed to catch and scatter light in patterns across the floor. James watched her draw, his eyes widening. "The sound would change throughout the day," he whispered, "as the light moves." But their harmony faced its first test when they disagreed about the final design. James worried that too many crystals would create chaotic echoes, while Sophie felt that fewer would lose the effect she envisioned. "It needs to breathe," James insisted, his voice still gentle despite his frustration. "It needs to dance," Sophie countered, equally soft but certain. They sat in silence then, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. Around them, the bookstore continued its quiet routine, but at their table, the air felt thick with tension. It was the shopkeeper who broke the spell, arriving with 2 cups of lavender tea. "You know," she said wisely, setting down the cups, "sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the space between notes." Sophie and James looked at each other, then back at their shared drawings. Slowly, they began to see how their different visions could weave together. Fewer crystals, but placed with perfect precision. Like raindrops, intentional in their scatter. As weeks passed without rain, they discovered other ways to find their rhythm. James recorded the early morning sounds of birds in the botanical garden, while Sophie captured the way dawn light filtered through leaves. They learned that silence could be as meaningful as sound, that sunlight could paint shadows as gently as rain painted reflections. Then, one evening, as they sat sharing iced tea instead of their usual hot blend, the air changed. Sophie felt it first, that familiar heaviness that preceded a storm. James noticed her expression and tilted his head, listening. The first drops fell just as Miss Weatherby preparing to close the shop. Instead, she smiled and began brewing their usual tea, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. Sophie and James moved to their familiar window seat, watching as the weeks of dust washed away from the city. The rain fell like a forgotten lullaby, and in its gentle return, they found their own harmony again. "I've missed this," Sophie whispered, her hand finding James's across the table. "It was worth the wait," he replied softly as the rain welcomed them home. The Botanical Gardens Conservatory had never looked quite like this before. Sophie's watercolor paintings hung from crystalline threads, turning slowly in the air, while James's recordings of rain played softly from hidden speakers. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined alone. A rain symphony for all the senses. "It's perfect," Sophie whispered, watching visitors close their eyes as they walked through the installation. Some reached out to touch the paintings, while others stood still, just listening. James stood beside her, recording these new sounds, art and rain and human wonder all mixing together. Later that evening, they made their way to Weatherby's, drawn by habit and comfort. But something was different in the air, and it wasn't just the approaching storm. Miss Weatherby sat them down at their usual table, her expression gentle but serious. "I've been thinking of retiring," she said softly, placing their tea before them. 30 years is a long time to keep watch over stories and secrets. Her eyes twinkled as she looked between them. "Though I must say, yours has been one of my favorites to witness." Sophie and James exchanged glances, both realizing how this place had become more than just a shelter from the rain. It was where their story began, where their separate arts had slowly woven together into something new. That evening, after Miss Weatherby left them with their tea, they began something they'd never done before, creating together in real time. Sophie sketched the sound waves of rain that James recorded, turning them into flowing lines that seemed to dance across her paper. James captured the soft sounds of her pencil moving, mixing them with the rain to create gentle melodies. "I've been collecting something," James said after a while, his voice barely above a whisper. "Moments like these. The sound of your pencil, the way you hum when you're drawing, the rain from our first night here." Sophie looked up from her sketch, her eyes meeting his. "What will you do with them?" "You'll see," he promised, smiling that quiet smile she'd grown to love. "When the time is right." Outside, the streets grew quiet as evening settled in. Tomorrow would mark 1 year since that first stormy night when Sophie had sought shelter in this very spot. The forecast predicted rain, of course. Some things, it seemed, had a poetry all their own. As they prepared to leave, James carefully packed away his recording equipment, and Sophie closed her sketchbook full of sound waves turned to art. Miss Weatherby watched them from behind her counter, knowing that while her chapter might be ending, theirs was about to begin a beautiful new page. "Same time tomorrow?" Sophie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Rain or shine," James replied, but they both knew it would rain. Some stories were written in the clouds themselves. As they reached the door, Miss Weatherby stepped out from behind her counter, something unusual in her evening routine. Her gray hair caught the soft lamplight as she approached them. "You know," she said, her voice warm with memory, "in 30 years of watching people find shelter from the rain, I've never seen two souls quite like yours." She reached out and squeezed both their hands. "Promise me you'll visit, even after changes come." Sophie glanced at James before turning back to Miss Weatherby. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked softly. "When you brought tea while we wait for the power to return?" Miss Weatherby's eyes crinkled with her smile. "Sometimes the best things happen while we're waiting for something else entirely." "You knew," James said quietly. "You kept bringing us tea, keeping our table free on rainy days." "The rain has brought many people through that door," Miss Weatherby replied, gesturing to the entrance where droplets still painted patterns on the glass. "But few have understood its music the way you two do." Sophie stepped forward, impulsively hugging the older woman. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all the tea, all the quiet moments, for understanding what we needed before we did." James touched the well-worn wood of the doorframe, his voice thick with emotion. "This place, you've given us so much more than shelter from the rain. Your table will always be your table," Miss Weatherby said softly, her eyes glistening. "Even if I'm not here to serve the tea, some stories belong to the rain, the books, and time itself." "We'll be here tomorrow," Sophie promised, her hand finding James's. "For our anniversary," James added, sharing a knowing look with Miss Weatherby that Sophie didn't quite catch. Miss Weatherby's smile deepened, holding a secret of her own. "The forecast calls for rain," she said, as if she had arranged it herself with the clouds above. They stepped out into the rain-washed evening, the shop's warm light spilling out behind them. Through the window, they could see Miss Weatherby's silhouette, watching over them one more time, just as she had that very first night. Tomorrow would bring its own story, but for now the rain fell softly, blessing their departure with its gentle symphony. 1 year had passed since that first stormy evening. Sophie and James stood before Weatherby's books and Brew, rain falling gently around them. Miss Weatherby had given them her spare key with a knowing smile, understanding why they needed the store to themselves tonight. Inside, the store held the same magic it had that first night. The rain-streaked windows, the warm glow of reading lamps, the familiar scent of books and brewing tea. They had arranged everything perfectly. James's recording equipment set up near their window table. Sophie's sketchbooks laid out just so. James adjusted his ever-present rain-spotted glasses, smiling as he set up his last recording of the evening. "Listen," he whispered. Through his speakers came a symphony of their year together. rain on windows, pencils scratching on paper, soft laughter, teacups clinking, and Miss Weatherby's warm voice serving tea on that first night. Each sound wove together like notes in a love song. "I've been collecting moments," James explained, his voice matching the gentle rhythm of the rain outside. He placed a small leather-bound book between them. Every rainy day, every quiet afternoon, every sound that made up our story. Sophie opened it carefully. Inside, she found pressed flowers from their walks, snippets of her sketches, James's handwritten notes about different types of rainfall they'd experienced together. Their entire year preserved in pages and petals. "Turn to the last page," he murmured. There, in James's careful handwriting, was a simple question. "Will you make rain sounds with me forever?" Sophie looked up to find him holding a ring that caught the lamplight just as raindrops had caught candlelight on that first evening. Its design mimicked a sound wave, the pattern of rain falling on the bookstore's roof. "Yes," she whispered, her voice mixing with the gentle patter of rain. They left the store hand in hand, pausing to lock up carefully. Above them, Miss Weatherby raised her teacup in a silent toast. The rain fell softly around them as they walked home, no longer needing shelter from it, but choosing to walk slowly through it anyway. The city lights gleamed on wet pavements, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, nature's gentle applause for their beginning. Some love stories come as gently as rain, falling in soft moments and quiet glances, in shared silence and understanding. Sophie and James's story would continue, written in rain songs and sketches, in teacups and quiet evenings, in the space between thunder and lightning, where all the best love stories live.